Dr. Todd Phillips spent the last 10 days in Liberia at the height of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Good evening, I'm Richard Ray.
And I'm Natalie Solis. He returned to DFW this afternoon, just hours after a fellow North Texas missionary battling the Ebola virus was moved back to the U.S. It's been nearly 36 hours since Dr. Kent Brantley walked into an Atlanta hospital on his own. Samaritan's Purse, the charity he was working with, says his condition is improving. In a statement, the charity also says the doctor received a dose of experimental serum before returning to the U.S. Brantley previously refused the serum, instead making sure it went to another American missionary battling Ebola.
That patient, Nancy Wrightbowl, is expected to return to the U.S. on Tuesday. She will be taken to the same Atlanta hospital where Dr. Brantley is now being treated. Wrightbowl was working as a missionary nurse in Liberia when she was infected. James Rose joins us now in studio. He was at the airport when Brantley and Wrightbowl's colleague, Dr. Phillips, arrived in the airport, and he joins us now with that story. James.
Richard, it is a remarkable story, one of crisis, conviction, and a calling to make a lasting difference in the third poorest country on the planet.
Just getting inside the airport was actually much harder.
Todd Phillips just returned to North Texas after 10 days in Liberia, the epicenter of the deadly Ebola virus.
We beefed up security. There were screeners at two different locations screening for fevers with an ear screener for fevers, and then also they looked at your eyes just to see how your overall look was.
Phillips is the founder and director of a Christian charity called The Last Well. Phillips says he often works with the staff of Samaritan's Purse, the organization that recently had 2 workers contract the Ebola virus. He says he had dinner with several staff members that worked in the isolation center where Dr. Kent Brantley of Fort Worth contracted the virus.
You know, we prayed for them. We sat down, we talked with them, and we expressed our concern, told them we'd be praying for them over the 21 days.
Those team members, he says, were flown to Kenya to be kept in quarantine for 3 weeks.
You know, we're trying to reach the whole country with water and the gospel.
Despite the threat of the deadly virus spreading, Phillips says he is determined to bring clean water to all of Liberia by 2020. There's no cure for the Ebola virus, but Phillips says there is something that can be done about contaminated water.
The same number of people that have died from Ebola in all 3 countries over the last nearly 6 months, that same number of people died just in Liberia every single week from waterborne illness. So this Ebola screams internationally of its presence, and this silent killer, waterborne illness, never gets a whimper. As Americans, we can reach in there with a message of hope in the midst of crisis.
Now, Phillips says he believes the Liberian government is taking the Ebola virus threat very seriously and doing the best it can to contain it. Either way, he says he will be going back within the next 6 months to carry out his mission of bringing clean, safe drinking water to all Liberians by 2020, Richard.
And that is a good mission. Now, James, Dr. Phillips says the Liberian government's doing what it can to handle the outbreak, but what does that involve?
Well, you know, he described some things he saw and experienced there, such as the government office buildings shutting down so that they could be sterilized. And people were wearing those protective suits and gloves and using Clorox and bleach. And he said whether the building was contaminated or not, no one really knows for sure. But it did create the perception that the building was safe and clean to work in. And it appeared to make the staff feel a lot better when they came back to work. He says things often changed quickly. Like one day he left his hotel in the early morning, came back in the afternoon, and there were some cleaning stations set up out front of the hotel where you physically had to wash your hands with this Clorox water and bleach. And they had to have an attendant watch them wash their hands before they were ever allowed to go back in. And again, you know, the effort to show the virus is being taken seriously. Another concern he had was saying, you know, the airport he feared might just shut down altogether.
A story we will continue to follow. Thank you, James Rose.